All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everybody, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks weekly podcast. Hope you're doing well. We're going to have somewhat of a different format this week. First of all, we're revisiting the TAVR issue again. Last time, our TAVR episode focused on Edwards, which leads the market with Medtronic. This time, we'll talk with Medtronic. I spoke with Nina Goodhart. Nina is president of the Structural Heart and Aortic Operating Unit at Medtronic. We included this interview as part of our Medtronic Talks podcast, but I wanted to share it with you here because it matches up nicely with an interview that Chris Newmarker, executive editor of Life Sciences at Mass Device, did with Santosh Prabhu. He is a divisional vice president of global product development at Abbott Structural Heart. Abbott in September reported securing FDA approval for its own TAVR product called Portico. So Chris does a great job talking with Santosh Prabhu about Portico, why it's different, and why Abbott is hopeful to make a mark on the space. Then we'll follow up again with Nina Goodhart. Unfortunately, I'm traveling this week. Chris was out of pocket, so we won't have a Newsmakers this week. We'll just bring you two excellent interviews. I hope that is enough.
Hi there. Our guest today is Santosh Prabhu. Santosh is Divisional Vice President of Global Product Development in Abbott's Structural Heart business. He's working on his MBA, and he has a PhD in mechanical engineering. Santosh has been a driving force behind some of Abbott's most important cardiac implants of recent years. That includes the company's MitraClip transcatheter mitral valve repair device, as well as the catheter-delivered Amplatz Piccolo occluder that can go into premature babies weighing as little as 2 pounds. Today, we're going to talk about Abbott's new Portico with FlexNav TAVR system. Abbott announced FDA approval in September. Santosh, welcome to Device Talks Weekly.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
It's really great to have you on. So when I was researching for this interview, I read that you have some, very personal motivation behind your work in the structural heart space. Are you comfortable talking about it a bit?
Yeah. I have a very personal connection to what I do on a day-to-day basis. Cardiovascular disease runs in my family, and I lost my dad to a heart attack when I was just 7 years old. And after going through all the schooling, the first job that I got was working on designing stents for treating coronary artery disease. It's a device that could have saved his life had it been available at that time. So I thought, I realized that even though I had studied aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering, and starting working on stents, I thought this was my calling. And I've pretty much dedicated most of my career, almost all of my career actually, designing devices for treating various cardiovascular diseases.
Yeah, wow. I'd have to say, I feel fortunate myself because it runs in my family too. But at least I got to know my dad for the first 40 years of my life because he passed away when I was 40. But
sorry, yeah.
But it's I know I myself. It feels like writing about medtech innovation. I think maybe at least I can hopefully help boost some innovation and, hopefully, less people, we have less relatives who lose less people, along the way. But when I was reading about your background too, you started out, with an interest in aerospace because, space, especially when you're young, it's cool. Outer space is cool. But it kind of seems like, doing work and, engineering inside the human body can be cool too. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I studied aerospace engineering and I wanted to be a rocket scientist. So, but then when I started looking at medical devices, we are at the cutting edge in both areas, whether it's aerospace engineering or developing medical device technologies. And there are a lot of similarities. I was studying airflow over aircraft surfaces, right? Here I'm studying blood flow over, cardiovascular stents when I first started. Right, we're looking at hemodynamics of transcatheter aortic valves. We are looking at reducing the mitral regurgitation using some of our transcatheter mitral valve, repair products. We are trying to fix, leaky mitral valves with our transcatheter, 10-9 transcatheter mitral valve replacement product. We are trying to improve hemodynamics with our transcatheter, with TriClip, which is a transcatheter mitral valve, tricuspid valve repair product. So, there are a lot of parallels between both those areas. And I feel, as I mentioned, for personal reasons, I feel the cardiovascular medical device space, in that space, working in that space, is a lot more fulfilling for me, particularly when I realized about the impact that the products that we develop has on the lives of patients, right, all the way from prematurely born babies to 90, even sometimes 100-year-olds, right? So it's the impact of the work that we do at Abbott is huge in terms of the standard of care for patients all over the world, people all over the world.
So we're here today to talk about the TAVR system approved in the U.S. And Edwards Life Sciences and Medtronic, they've had TAVR offerings around here for years. What kind of advantages is Abbott offering with its TAVR system, and how can you improve the TAVR space?
Yeah, so Edwards and Medtronic have their products. But the space, the TAVR space is or aortic stenosis that we're trying to address here is one of the most common and life-threatening heart valve diseases. With about one in 8 people aged over the age of 75 have some form of moderate to severe stenosis with this structural heart condition. And so our TAVR product in the U.S. that has been approved, Portico with FlexNav, is used to treat people with symptomatic severe aortic stenosis who are at high risk for open or extreme risk for open heart surgery. The Portico valve itself has some of the advantages it has is it's more intraannular. So you see earlier hemodynamics, improvements in hemodynamic conditions right off the bat when you're deploying the valve. And also the major advancement is in terms of the delivery system. The FlexNav delivery systems, I think, is a major advancement. It's a major innovation in which how the valve is delivered based on the engineering that has gone into design of that delivery system. For instance, one of the major challenges that a lot of our clinicians have is the accurate placement of the valve, and that's exactly what the FlexNav allows the doctors to do, very precisely and accurately place the valve, in the desired location.
I've heard it described as a novel catheter delivery system. How is it novel?
Yeah, so it's first of all, you have to navigate the valve or the catheter with the valve in it through a very tortuous aortic anatomy, right? So the FlexNav has the catheter design allows for that, for the maneuvering, right? Then the other thing also we have done is we have there's a hydrophilic coating that we have put on our catheter, which most of the other catheters don't have, that allows it, which reduces the friction as we navigate through that tortuous anatomy. So that's one thing. Then also we have it's a low profile catheter. It has the lowest profile in the industry. It's about 14 French. And the other thing also that we have done is there's something called a stability layer. And the stability layer is what allows to a large part the accuracy, improves the placement accuracy. Usually what the doctor has to do is sort of maneuver the catheter as the valve comes out of the catheter to make sure that, he places it at the right location. Now with the stability layer that we've incorporated, he necessarily doesn't have to do that. So as you start deploying the valve, wherever you decide the valve needs to go, you start the deployment process and the valve deploys in that location. He doesn't have to maneuver or rotate the catheter or move the catheter front and back.
Wow.
Forward and backwards. So those are some of the advancements that we see that we have made in our catheter design.
MedTech is notorious for not having much materials innovation. Anything more you can tell about this hydrophilic coating? Like anything else you could talk about it?
No, the hydrophilic coating it has been used in other applications, not necessarily for a lot of the TAVR TAVR systems. So that's something that, that is the coating by the material in the coating by itself is not necessarily novel, but the fact that it has been used in the TAVR on our FlexNav system in the areas where we desire to have low friction. I think that is the novel part. There are parts of the catheter that you need to have that reduced friction, particularly the ones that are interacting with the human anatomy as you're delivering the valve. And there are parts where you don't need it to be slippery. You need the anchoring, right? And that part we don't have it. So it's very well thought out. And then in designing the system, one of the challenges is you have to design a catheter taking into account a varied patient anatomy. All the aortas are different, the curvatures are different, the orientation of the valve is different. So we have to study this catheter as we're designing it into very clinically relevant benchtop models that we develop, taking into account all the anatomical variation, the curvatures, the diameters of the vessels, and things of that nature. So it's not just the catheter portion of it that was innovative, which it is, but there was also a lot of innovation in how we test these products on the bench.
How do you test that? Do you have like glass models or?
We have tried to simulate the anatomy. Like we take these actual patient scans and develop these models, and we look for those clinically the worst case situations where we can test these products. And these are sometimes we use patient information to generate these scans and these models.
This is like 3D printed models, or
these are 3D printed. Some of them are 3D printed. There are silicone models also. That we create, which has the similar kind of flexibility and the texture to a certain extent of those of the human anatomy. It allows us for direct visualization, and then we also try to simulate it under fluoro and trying to simulate the actual clinical situation on the bench. And so that's how we have evaluated the FlexNav 2 as the team iterated on successive successive
Having a size that's 14 French, I mean, what kind of challenges did you have to overcome to like deploy a TAVR out of a catheter that was so small like that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So first of all, making that catheter small itself, right? So we have to make sure that we pick the right components, the right tolerances, the right blend of materials, right? And some of these there's a standard catheter materials. But how we tailor it, how we use those materials, the size of the materials, the right braiding configuration, all those, it's catheter design, I call, is more of an art than a science in many ways, right? So we had to, the team had to work through several different iterations. Not all of them worked, right? And but as we progressed, we got closer and closer to the design goals, and eventually we met those design goals of getting that low profile. And that low profile is what improves the deliverability of the catheter also. But to get to the low profile, there's a lot of engineering.
It sounds like the challenge was getting it that small. I mean, that was like just...
Right. It's a combination of, it's materials that we use and also just the design concepts, right?
Wow.
And the other thing that it has is also an integrated sheet. So sometimes, most of some of the other products in the market, the clinician has to use a secondary sheet, through which they put their delivery system. So, and sometimes they want to do sheetless without a sheet. So in our case, we have an integrated sheet. So the doctor has that option of either going sheetless or using our integrated sheet, which is built into the FlexNav system.
Tell me a little more. What is the sheath? What is that exactly?
So the sheath is, when you have access to so say you want to have access to the femoral axis. So there is, instead of using, first you get that access and you put a sheath through it, and then you advance a guide wire through which you advance. After that, you insert the TAVR system. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the sheath is a conduit that provides access to the vasculature, right? And then through that, you put the TAVR system or any delivery system, right? So in our case, instead of using a secondary sheath, a different sheath, it is actually inbuilt into our product, which is the reason we are able to drive down the profile too. because your catheter has the inbuilt sheath, so you have the flexibility to tailor the rest of your delivery system to your catheter.
Because you're relying on a standard sheath, then you wouldn't be able to have a catheter. It would have to be a larger catheter to accommodate it. So you had to build.
Correct.
You pretty much had to build your own sheath to go along with the system as well.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like that lower pro. So this is all about trying to make the system more flexible. Being able to get it through tougher anatomies. I mean, a little bit. Just why is that important? I mean,
in terms of why is it necessary to make it?
At least in my head, I'm thinking like, is this because the idea that this could be a TAVR that could go on in anyone from a child to a very senior person.
Yeah, well, but most of the times, when you are using the TAVR product, right, it is in people who are relatively aged, right? And as I said,
right,
it's 1 in 8 aged over people over the age of 75. Most of our patients are, so it's not designed for the. Some elements of the catheter, we can always leverage for other applications. But for the TAVR purpose, it's always a lot of it is about the ease of use, right? You want to have the doctor, to have a good experience in terms of delivering the product, right? Without having to, brush against the anatomy or dislodge any calcium or any of that, right? So the smoother the delivery is, the better it is. And then the more accurately the doctor is able to place the valve, the better outcomes he gets, the better it is for the patients, right? So those are some of the factors that we have to consider, not just for the TAVR, any catheter, any product that we design, right? Improving the effectiveness of the product, keeping it as safe as possible, making it as easy as it can be for our clinicians.
It really sounds like the advantage then here is the idea that for physicians, they can know that they have a TAVR system that's very flexible, very ease of use. You're just kind of sounds like you're really trying to up the game here on what can be done with the technology.
Correct.
And it has so many advantages because when you're an older person, I mean, getting your chest cracked open it's not something you want to go through.
And as I said, most of the patients the indications that we have are for high and extreme risk patients, right? So most of these patients can't handle the surgery, and that's why they're coming to the doctor for a TAVR product anyway. So
exactly. But then I suspect, like with other products from other companies, as time goes along and you get more data and more proof behind this could be expanded then to even more and more populations, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we run trials to get the expanded indication going into the intermediate and low risk patients and so on and so forth. And then also the other thing you mentioned about, as you get more data, as the product is used, you learn more about the performance of the product, and then you use some of that information to see what are the modifications that we can make for the future generation products, right? And that's how the FlexNav evolved too. We got a lot of data from the original Portico delivery system, and now we've designed the FlexNav to meet the needs of the market looking into the future. So
you had an original delivery system for Portico, and then you decide, there needs to be innovation with the delivery system. I mean, how did you get to that point? I mean, what was some of the thinking behind that?
Yeah. So, and at Abbott, we are always constantly looking to innovate onto our next generation products, right? There are multiple. One is as we start studying our products, internally, we know what are the enhancements that we can make on the next generation products, right? So we want to get the product out to the market as soon as possible with the most safe and effective product, but then we also want to continue improving on it. So we have some of our internal evaluations that we do. And then also as the product is either commercialized or is used in clinical trials, they're safe and effective, but we want to improve the effectiveness further, right? So we already, based on the use of the product, we work with clinicians very closely. They are very valuable partners for us. And we solicit their feedback, and that also goes as input into the design of our next generation product.
Wow. So you went through all these processes, and it sounds like you just got to the point we need to build a better catheter delivery. That this was an area where you could improve and kind of up the game on this. Correct.
Yeah. And then there are a lot of technology elements also evolve, right? So things that couldn't be done 10, 15 years ago, now that technology has evolved. So we can incorporate some of those technologies in a catheter concept too, right? Making parts smaller, tighter tolerances. And these are some of the things that, help us. as we advance our technologies too. So it's not just the catheter technology, also some of the enabling technologies that go with it.
Yeah, I mean, what were some of the enabling technologies? I mean, what's happened? I mean, if you were trying to do this 10 years ago, would you have been able to make a delivery system with a 14 French size like that?
Yeah, it would be a challenge, right? So a few things. One is, as the design itself evolves, so you have to pack the design smaller into a smaller catheter, right? So there's the implant design that has to evolve. Then there are catheter components also, right? We use some of the same materials, but there are also things in terms of component that go inside the catheter. So can we have tighter tolerances, make them very precise and specific, minimize the interaction, minimize the friction between the internal components of the catheter? So all those technologies have also evolved in terms of how we manufacture, how we build these catheters. And so all that also helped as we design the FlexNav system, and will continue to evolve as we go further down into looking at a future valve and delivery system technologies.
Yeah, I mean, now that you have FlexNav, anything you can disclose about, what else could it be used for? I mean, is there potential to use this for other type of implants?
Yeah, so a lot of these things, right, they are platform technologies, and they potentially could be used and will be used for designing other delivery systems, certain components of the technology, right? Without getting into too much details, I think we have a lot of capability just in terms of designing, building, and testing delivery systems. And I think whether it's TAVR or whether you look at any of our transcatheter, mitral, and tricuspid replacement products, so all this technology can be leveraged and will be leveraged there, right? TAVR is, is one of it's a widely commercialized. A lot of patients being treated with TAVR, but there's also transcatheter mitral valve replacement that we're looking at, where again we have the same challenges: tortuous anatomy, femoral access. You have to go through the septum, deliver a valve into, which it's a little, it's a different design. Into the mitral annulus, right? So that is even more complicated, but some of these technologies are being leveraged there too. And then there's a tricuspid valve replacement, which is in early stages, and some of these technologies will be leveraged there too. So
that's exciting. So what you learned with, designing FlexNav for the TAVR, this could, you have the MitraClip for repair, but mitral valve replacement is, transcatheter. It's that's kind of like the next really big thing is in tricuspid as well. So it sounds like you learned some neat things. This is more of a 101 type question but just for people who aren't as knowledgeable about catheter delivery for implantables. I mean, what are the common materials that go into these things?
Yeah, so there is a lot of nylon, T-bags, polyamide, polyester, polyethers, polyethers. There is braiding, nitinols, stainless steel, braids. So these are some of the common materials that are used. And then also there is, we talk about the catheter shaft, right? But there's also a lot of work that goes on into the handle, because the doctor, that's what he's maneuvering, right? All the controls that he has on the handle, right? And so there are a lot of technology molded components that are used in there, a lot of precisely designed and fixtured components that go in there that help the actuation of the catheter, help the actuation of the system or the actuation of the deployment of the valve at the distal end. So the valve is all the way into close to the location in the aorta where it is supposed to be deployed, but you're actuating it from from the proximal end, from outside the body that the doctor has access to, right? The handle. So there is a lot of work that goes on to improve the ease of use of that, the whole deployment mechanism, and also the ergonomics. So he has a good user experience in terms of interacting with the delivery system.
Yeah, I've heard the doctors like to be able to feel it, kind of in a way, like not just see it on the imaging screen, but kind of feel in their hands what's going on.
Correct. They like the tactile feel. They feel that they're driving the system. So yeah, and all that needs to be considered as we design the delivery system.
That's interesting. It sounds like there's a lot of, so you got your engineering and then you got your human use, at the same time, like trying to figure out the human use factors behind all of those.
Yeah, there is a lot of effort that goes into the human factors assessments and evaluations too, because that's very critical, right? So at all stages of the development, this is what I meant when I said we partner with the clinicians. I think their feedback is very important. It's very critical. in all stages of the development as the product evolves, to figure out how are they interacting with the system. What are some of the things that they would like to see in terms of improvements as we go from one generation to another. Now, what are the sources of errors that can happen, and we have to eliminate those. So all those are important considerations as we build our delivery systems.
That whole process with those physicians with, Portico with FlexNav, was there anything along the way that was especially surprising? I mean, the moment we really learned something that you're like, gosh, I didn't know that. I learned something new.
Yeah, in terms of it's more of a continuous feedback mechanism, right? So they have. It's not just in the design of the delivery system. We also get a lot of the input in the design of the models that are used to evaluate the delivery system. I think that's where one of the other areas that they helped us a lot is figuring out, you're building this delivery system and you show it and you deploy it on a bench on a table in air. It performs very differently than if it's in a clinically relevant anatomy, right? So I think getting their help in designing some of those models was very helpful. In addition to, of course, the delivery system.
Oh, that's great. I think there's a lot of really good information here. I really appreciate this. Before we go, is there anything we didn't talk about, with Portico with FlexNav that would be really, really good to mention?
Well, I just think the technology that we have developed and with FlexNav is a sort of a leapfrogging technology in terms of how much we have advanced the product, advanced the delivery system, and we are working on future generation valve designs too that advances the Portico platform, and we are going through the regular process of getting regulatory approvals for those products, evaluating them in clinical trials, and then get approvals. And we are very committed to that, Chris. I just want everyone to know. And we'll continue to advance the space. We'll continue to build and design and build products that will, improve the quality of lives of our patients. And we'll invest in product development. We'll invest in generating the clinical evidence for it.
Yeah, the big thing I'm really hearing from you is that this isn't just Abbott saying, "Oh, look, we have a TAVR-2." You're coming on saying, "Look, we think we've advanced this a lot. There's a big advantage, and it sounds like you're going to keep on advancing. This is just the beginning of it." Absolutely,
and we are very committed to this space. I can tell you that much. Yeah, there'll be more to come.
Sounds good. It'll be really exciting to report that on Mass Device. And before we go, there's anything else you can tell us about, you're telling us we'll see more generations of the Portico in the future, but anything else about what's next in the structural heart, space? What would you be excited? What would you be excited to see happen in the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah. Well, there is a few things, right? Abbott has the broadest portfolio in the structural heart space, right? We have TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement. We have transcatheter mitral valve replacement, transcatheter mitral valve repair. We have structural interventions, which has, again, stroke prevention, all the pediatric and congenital applications that you're aware of. We have all our surgical valve product portfolio. We are actually looking at into the tricuspid space. We have TriClip, which is our transcatheter mitral valve, tricuspid valve repair product. We're looking at transcatheter tricuspid valve repair product. We'll advance the surgical valve platforms. So we have a very big, broad product portfolio, which will continue to innovate. But then the other thing also is, there are certain advances that will happen in this space, right? Both in terms of materials, the way the materials are processed. So that will also help. As I said, I was talking to you earlier about enabling technology. So that will also advance the space. Then there are things like robotic technologies also, right? Which will play a role in how these therapies are administered. And then also in terms of how, when we look at proctoring and training, some of these remote technologies would also help. Because that's one of the things the pandemic has taught us is using some of our virtual, whether it's virtual reality or virtual administration of some of these therapies, right? So all those technologies will also continue to evolve. And that's where I see this going in the next 10, 15 years.
When you're saying robotics, are you talking about telerobotics? Because that...
Yeah, well, no, not the, well. The robotic portion is more in terms of in the hospitals how there are already technologies that are the robotic technologies that are being used for some of the surgical procedures, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about in terms of remote proctoring. So training the physicians or proctoring some of these cases remotely. Some of those technologies will also continue to advance.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that a lot during the pandemic, that we've got a lot more of like virtual training, and which I'm sure the doctors too are happy not to have to go out of the hospital for a training meeting as much anymore as well. But I think that's exciting. I mean, we could hopefully. It sounds like that could make the technology even more accessible, around the world. So you don't have to be near a big metropolitan area in a developed country to get a lot of this. And
it also allows you to use your time very efficiently also, right? So
exactly. That's really great. Well, Santosh, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for coming on Device Talks Weekly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, great job by my colleague and co-host, Chris Newmarker. We have a complete overview of Abbott's entry into the TAVR market, where Edwards and Medtronic currently dominate. So as I mentioned, we talked with Edwards' Larry Wood a few episodes ago. Now we'll bring in a conversation I had with Nina Goodhart. She is the head of the structural heart operating unit at Medtronic. She also has the best name in medtech, the most appropriate name in medtech. We talked about that in the complete interview. You can listen to that on the Medtronic Talks podcast. You can find that on devicetalks.com or on any of the applications that you listen to this podcast on. You can also find it on Medtronic.com. It's everywhere. So look for the conversation I had with Nina Goodhart. But here we'll begin to discuss TAVR. I opened the conversation, or this part of the conversation, by pointing out to Nina that I know TAVR is a huge and growing industry and one of the fastest growing segments of Medtronic's business. So let's listen to what Nina has to say.
Yeah, so you're right. This, TAVR, or transcatheter aortic valve disease, the program there is the fastest growing and biggest opportunity, I think, in all of medtech. This is a program that treats severe aortic stenosis. So essentially, if you think about the aortic valve in your heart, if it gets narrow and blood can't flow through, you start to have aortic disease and you may need to have your valve replaced. And so since 2007, when the CoreValve was first approved in Europe, and then 2009 when Medtronic acquired CoreValve, we've been iterating on those platforms in order to really provide what we think is the best technology in the TAVR space.
Well, let's focus on the TAVR space. I want to drill down into you have a very broad portfolio in the space. You've got several programs. Can you kind of walk us through bit by bit? I know you had recent news on the Evolute that we can talk about, but what are your various products in that space?
So in the aortic space, really, we have been focusing on what we call the Evolute platform. That's the newest platform that we have. The newest product that will be coming out, we're expecting to bring that to market very quickly, is the FX valve, and that is a valve that is focused on ease of use, making it easier for physicians to be able to use that valve, deploy that valve, and provide what we call enhanced visualization so that you can really see what you're doing for orientation and depth of the valve.
And you've got several clinical trial programs going on in this space, is that correct?
We do. We have a number of clinical trials. In the aortic space, we've got the first trial that we're very excited about is a trial called Optimize Pro. And there we're really looking at how we think about pacemaker pathways. Very often a patient with aortic disease who receives a TAVR valve may require a pacemaker. What we're looking at is, can we provide a technique that physicians can use that's called cusp overlap? Can we use that technique to bring down the number of pacemakers, to bring down the rate of pacemakers? And so that is a trial that's currently enrolling. We also we're very excited about a new trial that we've just started called the SMART trial. Mm-hmm. And this is really the first head-to-head trial in the TAVR space. And here we're really looking at the clinical question of which valve is best for which patient. And when we think about patients, a number of patients have what we call a small annulus. And so we want to make sure that you have the right valve for these patients. And so we've got this head-to-head trial with Edwards Life Sciences. Their valve is called SAPIEN. And so we've got a head-to-head trial with the SAPIEN valve to take a look at whether or not Evolut performs better in these small annulus patients. We believe that it does. We also believe that women primarily have a small annulus. And so we think about 80% of the patients in this trial will be women, which means we'll get really strong data on what's an underrepresented population in clinical trials.
What went into the decision, or talk a bit about the decision to do the head-to-head trial with SAPIEN? That's not common, not seen often in medical devices, at least as far as I know. Why was that necessary, and what is that? How do you sort of put a program like that together?
No, you're exactly right. It's not very common. Like I said, this is the first head-to-head trial in the TAVR space, right? And so, no, you're absolutely right, though. But what we started to see was that there was clinical equipoise around this. Physicians were really starting to think about which valve they should use. And because there's no head-to-head data, it was really hard for them to make that decision. So we had a number of physicians coming to us asking us whether or not we would think about a head-to-head trial, especially in this very critical patient population. And so we do as we normally do. We put a group of physicians together. We debated how we should think about this. We thought about the fact that this is not done very, very often, but we thought that the question was so important that it would be a really good idea to do something different in this space and really prove, I believe we will prove beyond a shadow of doubt, that the Evolut platform is really the best technology for these patients with a small annulus, especially for women.
Interesting. So talk a bit about the space in general. I mean, we saw Abbott move in. Obviously, a few companies have moved out, but this is an area that's getting more attention, more competition. I'm sure a study like this may not be the first time we see this, but how competitive is this space getting, and what do the new players mean to you, one of the established competitors in this space?
Again, you're exactly right. This has essentially been a duopoly. There have been two players in the space, Edwards and Medtronic. We are now seeing Abbott come into the space. I think for patients, it's always good to have more technologies that physicians can evaluate, make good decisions about which valve is best for their patients. The Abbott technology, we should think about it as first generation technology. It's designed differently, and if you think about the Medtronic valve, it's what we call supraannular, which essentially means it sits a little bit above the annulus. The Abbott valve is what we call intraannular, which means it sits a little bit deeper in the annulus. So if you think about blood flow, Tom, if you put something inside that annulus, it makes it narrower. The Evolut valve sits a little bit above, so it allows the orifice space to be a little bit wider, so it allows for better blood flow. The more blood flow you can get through the valve, the better for patients, the better their exercise tolerance, et cetera. And so we think we've got a really good advantage here with that supraannular design. We also have to remember that the new Abbott valve is indicated only for extreme and high-risk patients. The Evolut technology is now also indicated for those patient populations, but also for intermediate and low risk, so a much broader patient population. And so we think the Evolut valve is still a much better choice for physicians to make, but it will be great to see the continued evolution of new devices coming into the space. It's always good for patients.
I always have trouble sort of tracking or keeping track of valve to valve. So we've talked a lot about the aortic valve. What are some of the other opportunities? And I think you've hit upon them already, but in the other valves, is the aortic valve the largest opportunity, or are there equally large opportunities in tricuspid, pulmonary, and mitral?
So Tom, in the mitral valve, which is really the next big opportunity in med tech, our focus here is on mitral and tricuspid. We know that over 2 million patients, or 20 million patients, I should say, suffer from mitral and tricuspid valve disease in the US and Europe, which is, an enormous population. And so we're in the process of developing technologies both for mitral and tricuspid. In the mitral space, We have a product called Intrepid. This is a valve replacement for mitral. We are in the process of developing a transcatheter approach for that valve, and we're in early feasibility trials now to test that. We currently have a trial called Apollo. That's a pivotal trial, a global trial that's currently running, about 350 patients already treated. That's a transapical approach. And so that's really looking to test the efficacy and the safety of the valve. But our approach for bringing this to market will absolutely be through transcatheter. In the tricuspid space, again, we also have an early feasibility trial, also looking at that same Intrepid valve in that tricuspid space. Right now, there really are no options for patients with tricuspid disease, so it'll be exciting to see whether or not we can bring a technology forward that can really help these patients.
And how many of these valves could be delivered in a transcatheter fashion?
The goal is to have all of them delivered through transcatheter. The entire market is moving to transcatheter. And so our goal is to make sure that all of our valve programs, all of our valve technologies are able to be delivered through a transcatheter. So in our pulmonic program, those valves are delivered through transcatheter, TAVR, of course, transcatheter, and now we're doing trials in mitral and tricuspid to bring transcatheter technologies to the market. In the mitral space, we're also looking at repair technology. So if you think about mitral, you have the opportunity to potentially repair a valve or, if needed, to replace a valve. Because the space is so complicated, we've really been focused on what we've called this toolbox approach to bring multiple modalities into the market. And so on the repair side, we have a research development partnership with a company called the Foundry. They're very well established in this space, and they are working with us to develop a new repair technology. The goal for that technology, of course, again, also going to be transcatheter, but we're also looking to see whether or not it can be as safe as the current product on the market, to be even more effective than the current product on the market, and to give physicians what we call room for intervention. So right now, Abbott has a product that once you repair the mitral valve, the only other thing you can do is to send that patient to surgery. There's no opportunity for re-intervention. So with the technology that we're in the process of creating, you will have that opportunity. So that is, again, in early feasibility trials, and we're very excited about seeing what that will do.
I'd love to follow up on the work with the Foundry. This is the Half Moon project that you developed, and how did this relationship come together? I mean, traditionally, a larger company will obviously track an early stage technology, a startup. You may invest. You may even have a membership representative on the board. This sounds a lot more connected than any of those. How did you come to decide on this approach? And please describe the relationship a bit.
Sure. So because structural heart is such a large program, we have essentially had three approaches to our research and development. We have the work that we do organically, what we use our own engineers to help us create and develop. We look at small companies that we use as incubators to help us create new technologies where appropriate. And then we've looked at research and development partnerships like we have with the Foundry. We've known the Foundry well, so they have worked with us on renal denervation, another technology, of course, that we have here at Medtronic. And so as we were thinking about how to create this new repair technology, we thought that they would be really great partners. They've got deep experience developing technologies in the mitral space, and given our very close relationship with them on other working technologies, we thought that this would be a great partnership. And I have to say, it's proven to be just that.
And what do you think the outcome looks like? Are they building the product for you, or do you acquire the product if it becomes what you hope it'll become?
We have an investment. We've made the investment with them. We're working very closely with them, and then we will have the rights to that product.
Very cool. Excellent. Do you see yourselves entering into similar agreements with other entities, or perhaps another agreement with the Foundry? Is this a new model?
It is a new model, and we're liking it very much. So we're looking very closely at whether or not there are other opportunities to do something very similar.
It's an exciting program, and the Foundry folks are the best. So I'm looking forward to seeing what becomes of that. Before we let you go, I want to talk about a few issues, I guess, aren't directly related to your oversight of the structural heart business, but more in your efforts to encourage women to take leadership positions in medtech, and I assume elsewhere as well. What else are you doing, or what are you doing in that space? What efforts are you involved in?
So as you probably know, Tom, Medtronic's had this very significant focus on diversity, engagement, and inclusion. I have the privilege of co-chairing the Medtronic Women's Network. The Medtronic Women's Network, or MWN, has about 20,000 members, so extraordinarily large, really focused on gender equality and empowerment of women. We are focused on areas like retention and recruitment of women across all of our functions at all of our levels, focused on development and promotion of women, really focused on ensuring that women's voices are heard in specific policies for Medtronic, things like return to office and future of work, and ensuring pay equity. And so given the size of this network, we've got this really strong and powerful voice that we use to help Medtronic really think about the perspectives of women as they're making decisions about the organization.
That's terrific. Now, looking through just scanning the website for the Medtronic Talks podcast and the pictures we have, and it's a really strong representation for the women leaders at Medtronic. The reorganization, really, I think did you get a sense that as it was done, it really elevated women into these head of business, operating unit business positions? Do you feel like the reorganization really boosted that effort?
I think the new operating model absolutely helped women move into new roles all across Medtronic. We have a number of women presidents at Medtronic, which is fantastic. Of course, we want to work to raise women up all throughout the organization so that we can see women in all of our functions and at all levels continue to move forward. And so I think the operating model will absolutely help that, but mostly I think that Jeff Martha's focus on that, our executive committee's focus on that, is going to really make the biggest difference.
And the final issue I wanted to ask you about is just healthcare disparity. It would seem that the structural heart business is a business in which this is critical if people are unable to get the healthcare they need. What is Medtronic doing in that area to help ensure that folks have access to this great technology, other technologies, and folks who need help for their medical issues?
In structural heart, we've been looking very closely at racial disparities and healthcare disparities in aortic stenosis in particular, wanting to ensure that patients had access to these incredible technologies. We know from all of our data that these underserved communities have had less access, so we're in the process of developing pilots. We currently have 4 what I'll call grassroots pilots across the U.S., really looking at how can we better identify patients, how can we improve referral channels, and how can we make sure that our underserved communities, especially our communities of color, get to a referral physician, get to a valve clinic, and ensure that they get the technologies that they need and deserve. And so we'll start with these 4 pilots. Our intent is to expand them as we go and really work to make sure that everybody who needs a TAVR procedure, a mitral procedure, a tricuspid procedure, or a pulmonic procedure for that matter, gets one. And so excited about this work and looking forward to expanding it.
Fantastic. We're working on a lot of important projects over there, a lot of great technology. I really do appreciate your taking some time to share your story and their stories on the podcast.
Well, Tom, thank you again so much.
Well, that is a wrap. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Device Talks Weekly. I hope you enjoyed these great TAVR conversations. If you would please share them with your friends and colleagues on social media. You can connect with me there. I am on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. I'm on Twitter at MedTechTom. You can find Chris Newmarker on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. On Twitter, he is at Newmarker, as in a new marker. Please do subscribe to this podcast on every major podcast application. Also, we'd love it if you leave a comment or a rating to help other folks find this podcast. That's it. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast waiting for you.